Hey guys, what's up? Okay, so tonight, this evening, wherever it is that you're at, we're doing the introduction to book 4. So if you find this of interest to you, go ahead and text me at my phone number is in the link below or whatever, where you click below. And I will just ask for the info on book 4, and I will send you the authorship and the title and the authorship of it. So you can go find it yourself and read it faster than I'm probably going to get to. Okay. Introduction to book 4. Don Elkins. This book is an exact transcript from tape recordings of 26 sessions of an experiment designed to communicate with an extraterrestrial being. We started the experiment in 1962 and refined the process for 19 years. In 1981, when I was 1, the experimental results of our efforts changed profoundly in quality and in precision. Precision. Isn't that ironic? I can't say the word precision. This book is simply a report of the beginning of this latter phase of our work. Since our experimental work began, and even before we officially formed a research group, there was considerable confusion about the nature of our research. I would like to state that I considered my point of view to be purely scientific. Many readers of this material have used as a basis for its evaluation a previously assumed philosophical bias, which has ranged from what I would call objectively scientific to subjectively theological. It is not the purpose of our research group to attempt to do anything other than make experimental data available. Each reader will undoubtedly reach his or her own unique conclusion about the meaning of this body of data. In recent years, there has been much controversy about the phenomenon that were apparently incompatible with acceptable methods of scientific research. This included such things as UFOs, mental metal bending, psychic surgery, and many other seemingly miraculous happenings. To prove or disprove any of these alleged phenomenon is certainly not properly the task of the casual observer. However, most of the public opinion that has been generated with respect to these events seem to be the product of quick and superficial investigation. After almost 30 years of research and experimentation in the area of so-called paranormal phenomena, I must recommend extreme caution in reaching a conclusion. If it is possible to make money, gain notoriety, or have fun from perpetrating a hoax, then someone usually does it. Consequently, paranormal or psychic areas are prime targets for the tricksters, and the careful researcher usually has to observe copious amounts of quote-unquote garbage data in order to find a possible embedded gem of truth. This is especially true of Philippine psychic surgery and the large area of spirit communication in general. It seems to me that the presently accepted scientific paradigm is less than adequate. It is my opinion that our present natural philosophy is a very special case of a much more general case yet to be unveiled. It is my hope that our research is in the direction of this discovery. After assimilating several million words of alleged extraterrestrial communication, it is also my opinion that this book and the subsequent volume of the material contained the most useful information that I have discovered. Let's see. After assimilating several million words of alleged extraterrestrial communication, it is also my opinion that this book and the subsequent volume of the raw material contains the most useful information that I have discovered. As a result of all of this delving into the rather confusing subject of ufology and parapsychology, I, of course, have formed my current opinion of how things, quote unquote, really are. This opinion may change at any time as I become aware of future information. I like that. Duh, right? Anyway, this book is not intended to be a trustee of my opinion, so I will not attempt to defend its validity. The following is the best guess I can make about what we think we are doing. Only time will tell us to the accuracy of this guess. Our research group uses what I refer to call, quote, turned trance telepathy, end quote, to communicate with an extraterrestrial race called Ra, R-A, Ra. We use the English language because it is known by Ra. In fact, Ra knows more of it than I do. Ra landed on Earth about 11,000 years ago. Now this book has a copyright of dun, dun, dun. I don't know. Oh, excuse me. 1984. I like it already. And I have to show off my new cup. 7 Ps. Proper prior preparation prevents piss poor performance. Now, I love this cup for multiple reasons, but I would just like to give props to the Oppenheimer Ranch. Diamond's Oppenheimer Ranch. If you haven't been listening to his channel, you are missing out. I got it from that channel. Incredible cup. Let's see, back to this. Ra landed on Earth about 11,000 years ago as a sort of extraterrestrial missionary with the objective of helping Earthman with his mental evolution. Failing in the attempt, Ra retreated from the Earth's surface, but continued to monitor activities closely on this planet. For this reason, Ra is highly informed about our history, our language, etc. Probably the most difficult thing to understand about Ra is its nature. Ra is a sixth density social memory complex. Let me say that again. Ra is a sixth density social memory complex. Since Earth is near the end of the third density cycle of evolution, this means that Ra is 3 evolutionary cycles ahead of us. In other words, Ra's present state of evolution is millions of years in advance of Earthmen's. It's not surprising that Ra had difficulty communicating with Earthmen 11,000 years ago. The same problem will exist in our present quote-unquote enlightened time. At this writing, we have completed over 100 sessions of experimental communications with Ra. This approximately 300,000 words of information has suggested to me a possibly more adequate scientific paradigm. Only time and future experience will serve to validate and expand this paradigm. Ufology is a large subject. A reasonable amount of background material could swell this introduction to book length. Therefore, the remainder of this introduction does not attempt to cover every portion of this diverse and growing field of study, but is instead an accounting of some of the pertinent parts of our research from our beginning to the present day and the Ra contact. I've asked my longtime research associate, Carla L. Ruckard, to tell our story. Carla L. Ruckard. I first met Don Elkins in 1962. To me, he was a fascinating character and unusual combination of college professor and psychic researcher. He had done well over 200 hypnotic age regressions, probing past the birth experience and investigating the possibility that reincarnation might not be just a possibility, but the way things really are. In 1962, I joined an experiment that Don had created in order to start to test a hypothesis which he had developed with the help of Harold Price, an engineer for Ford Motor Company. That's interesting. Price had acquainted Dawn with the same information, which Dawn found quite interesting. Its source was allegedly extraterrestrial. Its content was largely metaphysical and seemed to be in line with all that Dawn had learned up to that point. Within this, material introductions were given for creating the means whereby to generate further material from this same source without the necessity of actual physical contact with extraterrestrials. Dawn's hypothesis was that this phenomenon might be reproducible. So he invented a dozen of his engineering students. Sorry guys, I'm tired. He invited a dozen, I didn't say that. I'm perking up, I swear. So he invited a dozen of his engineering students to join in an experiment with the objective of achieving some sort of telepathic contact with a source similar to that of the Detroit groups. I was the 13th member. Deanna, did you hear that? Sorry. I was the 13th member, having become interested in the project through a friend of mine. In those early days of contact attempts, with Dawn attempting strenuously to keep the situation controlled, months went by with what seemed to be remarkable but puzzling results. As we sat meditating, quote unquote, according to the instructions, everyone in the group except me began to make strange noises with their mouths. For my part, my main difficulty during those first 6 months was keeping a straight face and not laughing as the session gradually became a raucous symphony of guttered clicks, slurps, and tongue flops. The nature of the experiment changed drastically when the group was visited by the contactee from Detroit. The contactee sat down with the group and almost immediately was contacted, apparently by telepathic impression, saying, quote, "Why don't you speak the thoughts that are on your minds?" End quote. "We are attempting to use you as an instrument of communication, but you are all blocked through fear that you will not be speaking the proper words." End quote. Through this instrument, Walter Rogers of Detroit, Michigan, the group was instructed to refrain from analysis, to speak the thoughts, and to analyze the communication only after it had been completed. After that night, a month had not gone by before half the group had begun to produce information. By the time a year had passed, all in the group except me were able to receive transmissions. The speech was slow and difficult at the first because each individual wanted a precise impression of each and every word, and in many cases wanted to be completely controlled for fear of making an error of transmission. Nevertheless, this was an exciting time for the original group of students who began this strange experiment. In January of 1970, I left my position at school as a school librarian of a 13th grade. It's a lot of 13s. In January of 1970, I left my position as school librarian of a 13th grade private school here in Louisville and went to work for Don full time. By this time, he was convinced that the great mystery of being could best be investigated by research into techniques for contacting extraterrestrial intelligence and was determined to intensify his efforts in this area. During this period, Don worked on many peripheral areas of UFO research, always trying to put the puzzle, quote-unquote, pieces together. One of the great puzzle pieces for us was the question of how UFOs could materialize and dematerialize. The phenomenon seemed to posit a physics. I'm not sure what they're saying. The phenomenon seemed to posit a physics which we had not yet grasped. I just grasped it. Which we had not yet grasped, and a being capable of using this physics Don had gone to many seances, I don't know this word, SEACNCES, so like sea, like ocean, seances, by himself before I joined him in his research, and had very systematically crossed each name of his list. He was looking for a materialization manifestation, but not one he could prove to anyone else, but one which he himself could believe. Well, that's cool. It was his feeling that the materialization which seasons manifest were perhaps of the same or similar nature as the materialization of UFOs. Therefore, his reasoning went, viewing personally the mechanisms of a materialization and a dematerialization in a sense would enable him to hypothesize more accurately concerning UFOs. Interesting theory. In 1971, after I had been on several fruitless materialization medium searches with Don, we went to a seance held by seance. Are they trying to say seance? Seance held by the Reverend James Tingley of Toledo, a ministry of the Spiritualist Church. We went to see Reverend Tingley's demonstration 4 times. Before the first time, Don had casually examined Reverend Tingley's modest meeting place inside and out. It was built of concrete blocks like a garage. There was no gadgets either inside or outside the building. I did not know that Don was doing this. I merely sat and waited for the demonstration to begin. This last point is an important one when talking about psychic research of any kind. Don has always said that one of my assets as a research associate is my great gullibility. Almost anyone can play a joke on me because I do not catch on quickly. I resemble that remark. I have a way of taking things as they come and accepting them as face value, and only afterwards analyzing what has occurred. What? Sorry, I'm very much like that. This gullibility is a vital factor in obtaining good results in paranormal research. A desire for proof will inevitably lead to a null results and void experiments. An open mind, one willing to be gullible, leads its professor to a kind of subjective and personal certainty, which does not equal proof as it cannot be systematically reduced in others. However, the subjective knowing is a central part of the spiritual evolution of the Ra, to which Ra speaks so compellingly in this volume, and which we have researched for many, many years now. The seance began, as do all the seances I have attended, with the repetition of the Lord's Prayer. Did not expect that. The seance began, as do all the seances I have attended, with the repetition of the... Kitty says hi. Hi, Kitty. Say hi. The seances begin with, as do all the seances I have attended, with the repetition of the Lord's Prayer and the singing of hymns, such as Rock of Ages and I Walked in the Garden. There were approximately 26 people in the bare room, sitting on the straight chairs in the oval circle. Reverend Tingley had retired behind a simple curtain and was also seated on a folding chair. Of the occurrences of the first seance, perhaps the most interesting to me was the appearance of a rather solid ghost known as Sister. She wished to speak to me and to thank me for helping Don. Since I had never had a close friend that was a nun, I was quite puzzled. It was not until much later, when Don was flying us home, that he jogged my memory, and I realized that his mother, who had died before I met her, was known in the family as Sister. Both in the seance and in the following seance, when Don and I were called up, we could see the ghost-like figure of the materialized spirit quite clearly. I, with impaired night vision, could still make out features, but Dawn could see even the strands of hair on each entity. During the second seance, an especially inspiring quote-unquote master appeared suddenly, and the room grew very cold. He gave us an inspirational message and then told us that he could touch us so that we would know that he was real. He did so, with enough force to bruise my arm. Then he told us that he would walk through us so that we would know that he was not of this density. This he did, and it is certainly an interesting sensation to watch this occur. Lifting his arms, he blessed all those in the room, walked back through us, and pulled down in a small pool on the floor, and was gone. In 1974, Dawn decided that it was time for me to become a more serious student of the art of channeling. He argued that the 12 years of sitting and listening to inspirational messages were enough, and that it was time for me to take some responsibility for those cosmic resonance, as Brad Stringer has called them, that I so enjoyed. We began a series of daily meetings designed to work intensively on my mental tuning. Many of those who were coming to our meditations on Sunday nights heard about the daily meetings and also came, and within 3 months we generated about a dozen new telepathic receivers. During the process of these intensive meditations, we instituted our long-standing habit of keeping the tape recorder going whenever we started a session. Using some of the large body of material that our group had collected, I put together an unpublished manuscript called Voices of the Gods, capital G Gods, which systematically offered an extraterrestrial viewpoint as recorded by our group meeting. In 1976, when Dawn and I began to write Secrets of the UFO, published by a private printing and available by mail, this unpublished manuscript was of great help. During this period, one other thing occurred that was synchronistic. Dawn and I, who had officially gone into a partnership as LL Research in 1970, had written an unpublished book titled The Crucifixion of Esmeralda Sweetwater in 1968. In 1974, Adrija Pujarich published a book with Doubleday entitled URI, just the alphabetical URI. The book is the narrative of Dr. Pujarich's investigation of Uri Geller and their unexpected communication with extraterrestrial intelligence. The form of contact was quite novel in that first. Yeah, you want to play? Yeah, she drank some coffee accidentally about half an hour ago. I was expecting this. The form of contact was quite novel in the first. Some objects like the ashtray could levitate, signaling Dr. Pujarich to load the cassette tape recorder. The recorder's buttons would then be depressed by some invisible force, and the machine would record. No, those are my headphones. No. Thank you. During the period, where were we? Apologies. The recorder's buttons would then be depressed by some invisible force, and the machine would record. On playback, a message from an extraterrestrial source would be present. No. These are my meditation beads. No. Let's see. During the period, oh my God, Jeannette. The recorder's buttons would be depressed by some invisible force, and the machine would record. On playback, a message from extraterrestrial source would be present. Dawn was impressed by the large number of correlations between these messages and our own research. The book is fascinating in its own right, but it was especially fascinating to us because of the incredible number of distinct and compelling similarities between the characters in the real-life journal of Dr. Pujarich's work with Uri and the supposedly fictional character of our book. We went to New York to meet Andrija after phoning him, sharing our long-standing research with him and comparing notes. As our I love that. They weren't competing, they were actually trying to get to the truth. As our genial host came out onto his front veranda to welcome us, I stopped, amazed to look at the house. Even the house in which he lived in the country north of New York City was a dead ringer for the house his fictional counterparts had owned in our book. The identity was so close that I could not help but ask, Andrija, what happened to your peonies? Peonies. When I wrote about your house, I saw your driveway circled with peony bushes. Puharic laughed. Oh, those. I had those cut down 3 years ago. In 1976, we determined to attempt an introduction to the whole spectrum of paranormal phenomenon which are involved in the so-called UFO contactee phenomenon. This phenomenon is not a simple one. Rather, it demands a fairly comprehensive understanding and awareness of several different fields of inquiry. Since the raw material is a direct outgrowth of our continuous research with alleged extraterrestrial entities, it seems appropriate here to review some of the concepts put forward in that book in order that the reader may have the proper introduction to the quote-unquote mindset which is most helpful for an understanding of this work. He's so cute. The first thing to say about the UFO phenomenon is that it is extraordinarily strange. Extraordinarily strange. I like that. The serious researcher, as he reads more and more and does more and more field research, finds himself less and less able to talk about the UFO phenomenon in a sensible and quote-unquote down-to-earth way. Well over half the people in the United States has said in a nationwide poll that they believe that UFOs are real, and television series and motion pictures reflect the widespread interest in the subject. Yet, there are few researchers who would pretend to be able to understand the phenomenon completely. Dr. J. Allen Hynek has called this quality of the researcher the high strangeness factor and has linked the amount of high strangeness with the probable validity of the case. It's a water bottle. Why did you attack it? That was cute. Some of the people... He's never done that. That's kind of cute. Some of the people who see UFOs have the experience of being unable to account for a period of time after the encounter. The UFO is seen, and then the witness continues on with his or her daily routine. At some point, it is noticed that a certain amount of time has been lost that cannot be explained. Very often, these same people report a type of eye irritation or conjunctivitis. I have no idea what conjunctivitis is. If you do, please do tell me tell us in the comments. And sometimes skin problems. In extreme cases, a person who has lost time and seen a UFO will develop a change of personality and find it necessary to contact the aid of psychologist or a psychiatrist for counseling. Dr. R. Leo Sprinkle, professor of psychology at the University of Wyoming, has been conducting yearly meetings of people who have experienced this type, another type of close quote-unquote encounters. It was in a psychiatric therapy that one of the more famous of the UFO contact cases, that of Betty and Bernie Hill, was researched. The Hills had seen a UFO and had lost some time, but managed to reduce the significance of these events in their minds enough to get on with their daily lives. However, both of them, over a period of months, began experiencing nightmares and attacks of anxiety. The psychiatrist to whom they went for help was one who often used regressive hypnosis for therapeutic work. He worked with each of the couple separate immediately and found, to his amazement, that when asked to go back to the source of their distress, both Mr. and Mrs. Hill related the story of being taken on board a UFO while on a drive, medically examined, and returned to their car. Don and I have, through the years, investigated quite a few interesting cases, but perhaps a description of one will suffice to show some of the more outstanding strangeness which are quite commonly associated with what Dr. Hinnick calls close encounters of the third kind. In January of 1977, merely 18 or so hours after our witnesses' UFO experience, we were called by a friend of ours, hypnotist Lawrence Allison. Lawrence had been contacted by a witness's mother, who was extraordinarily concerned about her boy. We made an appointment with the witness, a 19-year-old high school graduate employed as a truck driver. He had seen a craft about 40 feet long and 10 feet tall, which was the color of the setting sun and very low altitude, approximately 100 to 150 feet. The craft was so bright that it hurt his eyes, yet he could not remove his gaze from it. He experienced a good deal of fear and lost all sense of actually driving his car. When he was directly underneath the UFO, it suddenly sped away and disappeared. When the boy arrived home, his mother was alarmed because his eyes were entirely bloodshot. He was able to pinpoint his time loss, since he had left precisely when a television program ended, and since he noticed the time of his arrival home. He had lost 38 minutes of his life. I lost some time once. Anyway, the young man wished to try regressive hypnosis to quote-unquote find his lost time. We agreed, and after a fairly lengthy hypnotic induction, for my dear friend Soulside Jules, if you're seeing this, can you remind me to talk to you about this? And because you're good at hypnosis, so that'd be cool. Anyway, we agreed, and after a fairly lengthy hypnotic induction, the proper state of concentration was achieved, and the witness was moved back to the point at which he was directly underneath the UFO suddenly. He was inside the ship in a circular room which seemed at least twice as high as the entire ship had seemed from the outside. He saw the three objects, none of which looked human. One was black, one was red, and one was white. All looked like some sort of machines. Each entity seemed to have a personality, although none spoke to the boy, and he endured a kind of physical examination. After the examination was finished, the machines merged into one and then disappeared. The ship bounced and rocked briefly, and then the witness was back in his car. If you are interested in reading a full account of this case, it was published in the APRO, A-P-R-O Bulletin, in Flying Saucer Review, in the International UFO Reporter, and in the MUFON, that's M-U-F-O-N, UFO News. One of the most familiar aspects of the close encounter is the experience that our witness had of seemingly understanding what aliens were thinking and feeling without any speech having taken place. Telepathic communication was long been the subject of much experimentation, and although there is much research, there has never been a definitive study proving good telepathic communication. Consequently, in the field of research into telepathy, it's still definitely a fringe area of psychic research. However, anyone who has ever known that the phone was going to ring, or the knowledge of what someone was going to say before it was said, has experienced at least a mild example of telepathy. Don states that telepathic experiments between himself and Uri Geller have been totally successful. However, since they were deliberately not performed under rigorous scientific control, They could not be included in any orthodox report. It is, in fact, our opinion that the rigorous controls have dampened effects on the outcome of any experiment of this type. L/L Research, which since 1980 has been a subsidiary of the Rock Creek Research and Development Labs, to this day holds weekly meetings open to anyone who has read our books. We still tend to insert the word quote-unquote alleged before the words quote telepathic communications from extraterrestrials end quote, because we know full well that there is no way of proving these basic concepts. However, the phenomenon certainly exists. Millions of words in our own files and many millions of words in other groups' files attest to this fact. Regardless of the more than occasional frustration involved in paranormal research, the serious researcher of the UFO phenomenon needs to be persistent in this investigation of related phenomenon, such as metal bending. The physics which Ra discusses having to do with the true nature of reality posits the possibility of action at a distance as a function of mind, specifically the will. Uri Geller has been tested in several places around the world, including the Stanford Research Laboratories, and an impressive list of publications concerning the results of these tests exist, more notably the Geller Papers and an offshoot of this metal bending phenomenon, the Iceland Papers. And we are hitting past the 35-minute mark, so I'm going to end it there and get back to it on another day. Love you guys. Hope you enjoyed. Okay.